Season 3 of Love Transform Evolve is brought to you by Dreams Financial. Alex and Steph have been my financial advisors for years, and that's no coincidence. They don't just see me as a client, but rather as a partner in building and protecting my wealth. Their personalized approach and innovative solutions have made financial planning a breeze. And I love the fact that they are in it with me, explaining everything as we go, and I always know where my money is going and why. And when it comes to the death of a loved one, Alex and Steph are experts at providing compassionate guidance, offering clarity and direction. For more information, you can visit their website at dreamsfinancial.ca. We're sticking with a theme here this episode, and we're still focusing on what it's like to work and also have caregiving responsibilities. You know, I have taken a pivot in my life, and one of the big things that I am doing is advocating for working caregivers and empowering employers to implement strategies to support their working caregiver demographic. Right now in Canada, employers are losing $1.3 billion worth of productivity because people are struggling balancing work and care. And in the U.S., according to Guardian Life Insurance in a report that they just did, that cost is $44 billion that is lost. The losses come in the form of absenteeism, people who just don't show up to work because they have too much on their plate or they have conflicting responsibilities. It comes in presenteeism, which is people who, especially in the working from home, are showing that they're there, moving their mouse, but they're really taking care of someone, changing their physical dress, let's say dressing on a wound or whatnot. It comes in the form of turnover rates, people who just have to leave their jobs because the responsibility of care is too much on their shoulders. And the pressures just keep mounting and mounting, and these costs keep mounting to employers. There are very real, tangible things that employers can and should be doing to support their working caregiver demographic. And one of those things is offering employees benefits, caregiver-specific benefits, to allow them to have certain flexibilities in order to be able to do care and continue to have their jobs. We speak with somebody today from an insurance company. Now, stick with me. I know there's been a lot of criticism around insurance companies, but this is an insurance company who has made it their priority to focus on the working caregiver demographic and to make sure that they are offering in their benefits programs different modalities to help people who are juggling work and care to do it in a way that provides them with fulfillment. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Traditional full-time work isn't designed to accommodate the needs of employees with caregiving responsibilities. But should it? Let's face it, caregiving is compromise, especially for those working full-time. But this doesn't need to be a bad word. And in a busy world where technology has allowed us to blur the lines between workplace and home, it is imperative that employers embrace their working caregivers, not only because it benefits the people themselves, but it benefits organizations too. Today, I'm sitting down with Gene Lanzoni, the Vice President of Content Marketing at Guardian Life Insurance in the U.S. With over 35 years of experience in marketing and market research, as well as a master's degree in theology, and being a caregiver himself, Lanzoni has a unique perspective on the benefits of embracing caregiving while being a high performer. Gene, thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Good seeing you, Cynthia.
Absolutely. So I want to start with your personal caregiving experience. What has that looked like for you over the years?
Well, it started with my first three children in the early 1990s. And then I've shared with you before, my wife was diagnosed with cancer when my kids were very young. And so I was caring for my wife and then also caring for my children at the same time. So that was really my first exposure to having a real burden in terms of, just the amount of responsibility while I was also working full-time, commuting to New York from central New Jersey 5 days a week. It was a lot. Then my wife recovered, thankfully, and she's still with us today, which is great. But my mother-in-law became sick shortly after my wife was going through radiation and chemo, and she moved in with us. So we were caring for my mother-in-law for a few years, and then a few years after that, my dad and my mother both started to fail with their health, and so they both moved in with us, and they lived with us for a number. My mother was here for 7 years. So we were definitely what you would call the sandwich generation for quite some time. And now, years later, we're caring for grandkids while my daughter and her husband are both teachers, and during the school year, it's tough to get time off. So when they're sick, and my wife actually watches them 2 days a week. So even today, years later, we're still caregiving. So caregiving, I think for a lot of people, it is just a part of your life. If you have children, loved ones, if you have, those who maybe need some help because of their health, yeah, you're caregiving in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. In planning all of your, I guess, your life, your career, was that ever something that was on your radar in terms of needing to be a caregiver
No,
and those responsibilities?
no, and that's a great question and a great point that most people aren't prepared, just like most people aren't really prepared for parenthood. But what comes along with that and what life will throw at you in terms of caregiving responsibilities that you could never have anticipated, it would be helpful if there, and I think that's where we ultimately want to talk a bit later in this conversation about the role that employers are playing in now providing the kinds of resources and education and information that many workers need who are trying to balance caregiving and their work responsibilities, but had no inkling of what was to come. But that's just life, right? You can't anticipate those kinds of things that are going to be thrown your way in life. So I had no idea and was totally unprepared, but you just figure it out.
And absolutely figure it out, become resourceful. I definitely want to talk about the support that employers or the role that employers play in supporting caregivers. But again, I'm going to lean a little bit on your personal experience. What would we say? You said 95 was when you became a parent? Was that
I
what you
became a
said?
parent in 92. We had
92.
first child in 92 and 94 and then 95.
Okay, so we've got 92 to 2002, 2002 to 12. So we're talking about 30 some odd years now.
Yep.
At
Yep.
which point in that trajectory did you start to identify with the term caregiver?
Not until I was working at Guardian over the last few years, and maybe we'll talk more about this later, but my role as a co-founder and co-lead of our caregiver ERG. So not until then. And so, I know that we've talked about this and you have questions, do most people who are parents think of themselves as caregivers? So we did some research a couple of years ago. We started to do it on Take Your Children to Work Day. We did some informal focus groups with our colleagues at Guardian who brought their children to Take Your Children to Work Day. And we did this little focus group over lunch and we were asking them about what terms they relate to. And no one related to the term caregiver. As a parent, they don't think of themselves as caregivers. So we thought we've got this caregiver ERG at Guardian that's intended to be supporting caregivers of all kinds within our organization, not only those who are caring for elderly parents or elderly and ill relatives, but also for parents. But they
Right.
didn't even consider themselves caregivers. So we were missing this huge percentage of our population who weren't participating, weren't attending our events, weren't really paying attention to what our Care ERG was doing because they didn't view themselves as a caregiver. So that was tremendous learning for us. And then we actually started to do some external research on that topic too, and found that the same was true of the population in general, that most parents don't think of themselves as caregiver. So interestingly, what we found, and I'd like to share with you, I think I did before, but some of the terms that this research turned up in terms of how people do think of themselves, parents, they consider themselves superheroes because of all the balancing that they do, but they definitely don't relate to terms like caregiver or especially caretaker. And you
Hmm.
see that term used sometimes almost interchangeably with caregiver, but that really generated a very negative reaction from a lot of people who associate caretaker with like a funeral director. So
Right,
that was
right.
one that they definitely didn't like. Sandwich generation, they don't really like that term, didn't relate to that either, even though they were in that role like I described before, but they really don't like using that term. So they just, it was funny some of the terms they used, but like personal chauffeur for their kids, or a hairstylist for their aging parent, or therapist, or peacekeeper, ATM. So those were all the terms that they used to describe themselves and what they do. But what was most important, I think, what was really inspiring to those of us who were leading the Care ERG is they talked about daily acts of love. That's
Hmm.
really what they talked about, regardless of who or how they were providing care. And so we adopted that as our motto for the Care ERG. We say, behind every act of love is a guardian caregiver.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
powerful. So, so powerful. In the 2 previous seasons of the podcast, we explore kind of this term of caregiver. You're talking a lot about your research around parents not identifying as caregivers, but also, a lot of the language that is around caregiving has been dominated by healthcare professionals, has been dominated by governments. And I think a lot of the reasons for that is because we have to kind of fit this checkbox, right, in order to be able to take advantage of certain benefits. Now, I feel like I'm speaking to the right person about this. So working for Guardian Life, Guardian Life is especially one of the leaders in the insurance space around supports for caregivers and caregiver benefits. What kind of a caregiver benefit could even be offered to caregivers?
Yeah. So over the last 10 years or so, there's been a lot more attention just in the market in the US in terms of the needs, the challenges that working caregivers face. And, a report we published a few years ago just talks about the really significant growth in the number of people who are balancing work and personal caregiving responsibilities. And so Guardian saw that trend, acknowledged it. That's one of the reasons why we were doing more and more research on the topic. And so, we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're walking the walk, talking the talk, and we are now doing an awful lot to support the caregivers within Guardian's workforce. So first of all, it starts with policies. So we have unlimited PTO. We offer 12 weeks of paid parental leave, which some states offer, but not all. So across the country, Guardian's, got 7,700 employees nationally. So we offer 12 weeks of paid parental leave for all employees, regardless of what state you're in. We also have remote work options. Those are all things that caregivers say are so helpful and beneficial just on a day-to-day basis. But then we also offer benefits from some very important vendors of ours, like Bright Horizons. So we've had Bright Horizons for a number of years for things like daycare, backup care. They have this tremendous benefit called the College Coach, which offers all kinds of support around the college essay process and writing a college essay, the financial aid application process. That gets a lot of great feedback from parents of college age children. And then Bright Horizons has this Sitter City membership, so just a babysitting or sitting service for longer term caregiving. And then they also offer a service, like I said, for backup care. So to fill some of those gaps, unexpected needs for care. So that's Bright Horizons. We also offer Wealthy as a benefit, which is a tremendous resource. It's a caregiver concierge, so they do all kinds of care coordination and referrals to help you find the right kind of care that you might need in your area. We also have Spring Health, so you think about the impact that caregiving has not only physically and financially, but also emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And so often, and we've done a report and lots of content on this topic, caring for the caregiver. So oftentimes the caregiver just doesn't really have the time or pay attention to their own needs. And so Spring Health is a behavioral health resource that we have available to our Guardian colleagues. We also make it available to our customers as well. And that is a great way for caregivers to get help, right? Whether it's they need to speak to a therapist or even just some online resources, but also just the community that's available through some of these resources. So there is kind of a caregiver community built into the Wealthy offering, where people can and then Guardian has its own ERG. So either way, providing that kind of networking opportunity to speak to those who are caregivers and hear about their experiences. So the sharing of experiences in a safe space is really important for caregivers, and really normalizing conversations within our organization about caregiver challenges. That I credit our senior leadership with recognizing that as really important, that they had to be the ones to kind of, set the right tone to create that culture where people can feel comfortable now talking about their caregiving needs and challenges, and it wouldn't result in punitive kind of actions or limiting their career in any way. So that's been really important, I think, to deliver the right message from senior leadership, creating the culture, and then supporting that with all of these benefits, policies, and ERG.
I think you have, said a mouthful, but also so many pillars to rely upon that contribute to somebody being able to take advantage of, of benefits. And, you highlight 2 things. There's the actual benefits packages, workplaces, I think akin to many workplaces like employee assistance programs, right? But there's also, you call out this culture of the organization itself allowing the perspective on caregiving to not be one that we have to be shy to speak up about, or something that needs to, we have to feel guilty, and it's one that's embraced. Now, ERGs, for large companies, large organizations, the term, we understand what that is. But for somebody who maybe works for a smaller company, an ERG is an employee resource group. Talk to me a little bit about how this resource group got spun up, how it works, and really the benefits. And I know you listed some of what people, the feedback that people have given in terms of being able to hear and see each other and each other's stories, but the benefits that you've seen from this.
Yeah. So when you think about the caregiver community, we've already kind of touched on some of the different aspects of caregiving, lots of different types of caregivers. And so with an employee resource group, you can bring people together who have like life experiences, like challenges, like needs, and have them share. And have them share how they've overcome some of those obstacles, how they've kind of made it work for them, how they've been able to find time to care for themselves. And so we have this broader care employee resource group, but that within that we have these subgroups. So there's a group that focuses on parents of children with special needs. There's a group that focuses on parents of very young children and teens. We have a subgroup that focuses on caring for the elderly. We have one that focuses on those caring for a spouse, because we found that some of the needs and challenges for that particular group was different than caring for an elderly parent or elderly loved one. But caring for a spouse, different. And certainly I could relate to that one. So that's what I think's been so beneficial, is that the members of the ERG, and we have now over 1,200 members of the ERG, and that's how we're able to form all of these different subgroups. But they've said that it really has helped them to just feel as though their voice is heard, for one thing, because the ERG, we have all of these different events, and as a result of those events, we take that information up to senior leadership and let them know, here's what we're hearing from our membership. This is what, their feedback is. So they have a voice, a stronger voice, right? Because it's 1,200 strong, but they also have a shoulder to lean on. They have someone who they can talk to, who they know will relate to their experience, and they can go to them safely and talk about, hey, how did you talk to your manager when you had to take some leave, or when you needed to ask about a different kind of work schedule? How did you go about handling that? So that's the kind of coaching or mentoring or feedback that people find very valuable, about knowing where to go now, because we're 3+ years old, 3.5 years old now as an ERG. And so knowing where to go to get this information and knowing who you can talk to is one of the biggest things. It's just awareness raising on a topic that obviously has been a challenge for a very long time. And I've told my own story that I've had many challenges myself as a caregiver during that time that I was talking about, where I was in the quote sandwich generation. And if there had been an ERG, if there had been more awareness, if conversations with colleagues and managers had been more normalized in the past, I'm sure it would have been less stressful for me. So I think that was one of the motivations for me to, when I had the opportunity to start this ERG, that's kind of what was behind it, is my own experience and recognizing that kind of community and those kind of resources would be so helpful.
That's incredible that you had that, I would say, the courage to start that, right? Because I think, you don't necessarily know where something like that is going to go. And yes, you see the benefit because you yourself have lived it. But, you also just admitted that until Guardian stepped in and allowed you to identify as such, it could have gone kind of sideways. So to see this, grow, how does it feel to see it build the way it has?
How about those stats that, you've probably seen them? They're in that report that I referenced, but the majority of caregivers never talk about their caregiver responsibilities at work.
Absolutely.
And that remains true. It's probably improved over the last 5 years or so, but it's still higher than it should be.
Speaking of that report, I was reading through it, and one of the things that really stood out for me is that since 2020, the number of hours that caregivers spend, or that working professionals spend in caregiving a week, has tripled. 49% of working caregivers dedicate 10 to 29 hours per week. 24% less than 10 hours, but 27%. This is 30% of working caregivers dedicate 30 plus hours a week to care, and to, while they're working their full-time jobs. And these are people who identify as caregivers. I wonder what the actual statistics are for people,
that's right.
who
it's understated
don't identify.
for sure. Yes.
Absolutely. So, what of the relationship of trust between employer and employee? I'm really just curious about, again, what Guardian Life has done, how that has been reinforced through communication. Is it executive management sharing their own personal stories? Is it pushing communications? Like, what has that looked like?
Well, so first it starts with when we talk about establishing a culture of care, that begins with senior leadership allowing for things like and supporting an employee resource group, offering policies and benefits. So all the things that we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. It also is about kind of sharing personal stories, shows empathy and compassion on the part of senior leadership. So they do that. And as a matter of fact, our chief marketing officer for the company recently just did an interview with me and another member of our CareERG about her personal caregiving story. And so, that's the kind of sharing from a senior executive and one of the top 12 people in the company that goes an awful long way to
Right.
making people feel like she gets it. So if she gets it, she's going to get me. She's going to get what I'm going through. And that's so valuable.
Absolutely. I opened this conversation referring to advancements in technology changing the way that we work, and Guardian Life just recently announced a partnership with Workday Wellness. Workday is a human resource management tech company, and Workday Wellness is an AI-powered software to help organizations tailor their benefits packages for employees. Tell me a little bit about this, and tell me maybe what opportunities you see for caregivers in this space.
Yeah. So today, there is a lot more focus on well-being overall. So lots of employers say, hey, that's a priority for their organization. Wellness has been a priority for a very long time. Medical plans have always included various forms of wellness initiatives, things like smoking cessation or healthy pregnancy programs, gym memberships and discounts, all these kinds of things. Today, I think there are more robust types of programs available, technology supported or not, but like Wealthy, like talking about some of the benefits that I mentioned before. So there's Wealthy, a concierge service around care coordination for caregivers. There's Spring Health, addressing mental wellness. There's Bright Horizons, which is another kind of caregiving support service, but there's so many others that we offer. What Workday Wellness and platforms like that are doing is now bringing all of those various resources and benefits together more holistically. And so it's a much better way of addressing all the various wellness needs that an organization may have and leveraging the technology to do so in a more efficient, more effective way, right? So these are the kind of benefits that people forget about because you don't have to enroll in them. They're available to you. They're evergreen. They're available all throughout the year, and people typically don't pay attention. And again, and then we talk about the caregiver nomenclature, and if people aren't relating to the term caregiver, they're really not paying attention. Hey, we have this new caregiver benefit from Wealthy. So something like this platform, like a Workday Wellness, where all of these different wellness-related offerings that Guardian makes available to our clients who are corporations, organizations, to make sure that their employees are aware of these benefits and also taking advantage of them. That's kind of the goal, a more holistic approach to well-being.
Innovative in its approach, I think, especially since, we talk about needing a village to care, and we talk about how the importance of that village really is about sharing resources and being available. And as we move further and further away from being in the office, let's say, or we are in our own homes, that village kind of goes away. And I think it sounds to me like Guardian is really embracing being a strong part of being that village for somebody who, who is actively be caring at some point in their life. Gene Lanzoni is the head of enterprise content at Guardian Life. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Cynthia.
If you like what you heard today, be sure to rate, follow, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Cynthia Iorio. Until next time.